Hi, and welcome back. Today we're going to be talking about admission anxiety and the knowledge and the emotion gaps. This was a term that I coined as I was working on site in various long-term care homes. And what was becoming really apparent to me was that there's this thing that both the families and the staff experience in that admission process, which is this admission anxiety. And there's a couple of contributors to this admission anxiety that I want to share with you. The first is what I talk about in the book called the knowledge gap. And you have a situation where families are coming in. This may be the first time that they've even stepped foot into a long-term care home. Maybe the first and only time that they've needed to make this decision to move a loved one into long-term care. And families don't know what they don't know. And it's not their fault that they don't know what they don't know. There hasn't been a lot of information or education on what is really, I would consider, a critical element of our healthcare system. That what happens is that families, they're getting their information through the media, and we know certainly through the last 2 years with COVID that there's been a lot of really negative and heartbreaking stories that have occurred. And so it's difficult for families to really have a good solid understanding of what it is that they need to know, what is it that they need to learn. So there's all of these things that they're not aware of, the home and who works there and what the routines are like and what to expect. And on the other side of the knowledge gap is the staff. The staff, there's so much that they don't know about the family and the resident. And certainly there's a certain amount of information that they get on the resident that's through the clinical file information. But there's a lot that they don't know about the family. And I want to share a video with you of a family member named Carolyn that I had the opportunity to interview, and she's going to touch a little bit on this. What has been the biggest shift for you as a result of working with the material in the Now What book?
Well, I didn't realize when we were coming into the home that we were coming into a home. We were coming into a home. We were not coming into really a clinical setting. My aunt, sometimes when she's not too lucid, she calls it a hospital. But we're coming into a home, and my sort of mindset was us against you. Like, we need to protect my aunt because of the negative things that we had heard in the media. The first 17 days, we didn't even get to go into the home because of COVID. My aunt had to be isolated. She ended up getting COVID, but she was asymptomatic. So she was okay. But, she had fallen a few times. And because I didn't understand anything about how the home worked, I didn't know who to go to. So I was going above the head nurse to the director of care because I thought that's what I had to do. I want to escalate it. You want the best. Right. So I was coming off very defensive and a little bit jalapeno-y, as you mentioned in your book. So that was my initial experience. And after a while, you start to settle in, things start to settle down. My aunt's medications got adjusted the way they needed to be. So then, we're starting to relax. And then really reading the book gave me some big shifts, understanding, like, I didn't even understand that. I should have known this, that staff were grieving the person that had been in my aunt's room prior to her. And I'm a very empathetic person. Once I clued in, because I didn't realize that the staff actually really cared. And the more I observed and the more I realized my aunt relied on her one main PSW and in the relationship that they have, I could just relax and take a breath and say, and really observe and evaluate and think, like, how do I want to have any interaction that could be potentially tense? How do I want it to end well? Because I want it to end well for me and my aunt, but also for the staff, because I need to honor them as well. They're doing not only a work, they're doing, it's a gift. It's a ministry. I'm not even sure what you could call it. It's a life calling.
I just loved that conversation with Carolyn. And as you heard, she touched on a few areas where there were knowledge gaps and making decisions based on not knowing how things worked or having that proper insight in education. And that's one of the reasons why in the book, Now What, I cover 20 different misconceptions that we have found, families, and myself included when I was a family member, that can trip us up. And so it's really important that we look at how do we close that knowledge gap as quickly and as effectively as possible to be able to avoid misunderstandings or conflict or concerns. The other gap is this emotion gap. And when I think back to my admission day with Ty, and I write about it in the book, and they were busy and they were running late, and I'm sitting there thinking, this is one of the hardest, most heartbreaking days of my life. It's not something that Ty and I ever imagined that we would be going through, where he would need to move into long-term care. And I did feel like we were being transacted with, like widgets on a production line. And sometimes there can be that gap in emotion. Admissions is a standard operating process for homes, right? When a resident leaves the home through transfer or passing away, usually within 2 to 3 days, a new resident is moving in because we have such a long wait in this province. And so it's part of the work that I do with homes is to really help to bring to life the emotional journey that families are on so that we can help to close that gap. And as like what Carolyn talked to, the staff are also grieving, and they've lost a resident in most situations, that they've grown to love and really care for. Sometimes it's a good transfer if the resident is being transferred to another home or another place to be able to continue to be cared for. So this emotion gap is something that it's really helpful when we're able to bring it to the attention of both the families as well as the care teams, that both sides have this knowledge gap, this emotion gap, that when we can really get the communication and provide that clarification, it can really help to close those gaps. The other piece that I share with my clients is that you're not just meeting the family, you're meeting their grief. And by that I mean, there are times that families aren't even really aware or recognizing that they are grieving. We can tend to think of grieving as something that occurs when somebody has passed away. But when somebody is ill, and I can say in my situation with both my parents and my husband, seeing that them losing their abilities and they wouldn't be saying that they were aging gracefully, that there is grieving that's involved in that. And sometimes when we have those strong emotional experiences, that it can come out kind of like what Carolyn was saying in those jalapeno moments, that sometimes we react disproportionately to a situation, or we're not fully hearing or understanding or able to communicate what our challenge is. And so it's helpful for us to understand and appreciate that we're not just meeting the family, we're meeting their grief. And so there's an opportunity here that I want to invite you to consider these couple of questions. And the first is, how can you help reduce admission anxiety for families, residents, and care team members? Based on what we've talked about, based on some of the elements and Now What, how can you help in reducing that admission anxiety? We may not be able to make it completely go away, in this challenging, life-changing, suboptimal situation, but certainly there are ways to be able to reduce those types of emotions that are happening. And how can you help close the knowledge and the emotion gaps with families and care team members? And some of the practical ways is referencing the Now What book, reviewing the 20 misconceptions, having conversations with family to say, out of those 20, which ones do you still have questions about? Which ones can we help you to better understand? What other questions or concerns may you have based on what misperceptions or information that's being shared with you, because the sooner that we can clarify and minimize the admission anxiety and close the knowledge and the emotion gaps, we are supporting the family members, the residents, and the care team members.